Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Allison Ban, and I'm the Executive Director here at Spark, a Center for Social Research Innovation. Thank you for joining us for today's Spark Talk, centering positive change in research using Photovoice. I'd like to begin by giving honor and thanks to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations as the traditional inhabitants of the lands where McMaster stands. To say that is to acknowledge a debt to those who are here before us and to recognize our responsibility to respect and honor the intimate relationship that Indigenous peoples have to this land. We are thrilled to welcome Andrea Belgrade and Joy Agner to speak with us today. Andrea has a long history in advocacy and policy and is currently working at University of California Office of the President, where she conducts system-wide survey research that informs university policy. And Joy Agner is an assistant professor in the Chan School of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy at the University of Southern California and does research focused on improving health systems and services for underserved populations. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we are really looking forward to your talk.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. So, Joy and I are going to talk today about how you can center positive change in research using Photovoice. So I guess I was already introduced, but I'll just do a little quick recap. So I did my undergrad at University of Minnesota and did my PhD at University of Michigan, always trying to stay close to that Canadian border, apparently. Then I moved to California, where I work at the Office of the President doing institutional research. So I'm actually doing more survey research now, and that's really there to inform university policy. So if you have any questions about that or how I might integrate some of the values that we are talking about today into that more traditional kind of research, I'd be happy to answer questions about that. My research tends to highlight the multidimensionality of experiences among structurally marginalized groups. And I really focus on highlighting coexistence of both individual and community strengths and vulnerabilities. I'm really interested in mixed and multiple methods, community based research, but I'm not just a professional doing work all the time. I have a lot of hobbies. So I'm really interested in bachata, which is a Latin dance. I do that a few times a week. I play tennis regularly. I picked up windsurfing this summer. I've actually done stand up comedy and I also go to shows. I've made all my own plates, cups, bowls. I do ceramics. I'm really into international vegetarian cooking. Like every Bay Area person, I go hiking and I actually really love fiction writing. So we can talk if you have any similar hobbies. So I think one of the things when people aren't familiar with photo voice method, sometimes depending on their background, they might see it and say, how is this science? And the reason that they may have that reaction is because of their phenomenological approach. So I have two questions here, and you can see which one aligns with kind of your training more, your own beliefs. So the one on the left, do you believe society has objective social facts? That is a little more typical of what we would call positivism or, postmodern. This is maybe more traditionally taught, I would say, especially in something like physical sciences. On the right, we have this other question. Do you believe reality is constructed through the meanings created by individuals? This is more aligned with the kind of underpinning of photo voice. So we're really interested in understanding people's realities as they tell it. And so these represent two very different ways of what is knowledge? How can we know it? What's knowable? So if you're hearing about this and you're like, gosh, this doesn't sound like traditionally what I think of as like science and like scientific method, it's because there's this very different assumption of knowledge. So I'm going to ask you all to participate a little bit. I hope you all don't mind and you're ready to unmute. I'm going to hope to get at least two responses. So get ready. I just want to know when you've been reading different studies, how have multicultural populations been represented in research? What topics are usually covered? And shout something out.
Hi there.
Hey,
My name is Joe Musokran. I am a policy analyst with the Chiefs of Ontario. Lately, I actually have one of my fellow policy analysts also in this meeting today. Shout out to Carly. We are lately concerned with data sovereignty and Indigenous data gathering methods. And so we have been reading various Indigenous readings and books. And one of the texts we just finished was reading a ceremony. And so that's a really good example of positively representing both the research participant and the researcher, showing marginalized groups versus academics versus sometimes the two overlap, and the topics that have been discovered or that are usually covered have been how do we take away that power imbalance between researcher and researchee and participant, and how do we do this in the most ethical and Indigenous worldview way.
It's really interesting. I feel like you should do a talk on what you've learned about
Well,
that.
when I saw the email for this, I figured it was deeply concerned with what we're discussing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very aligned, especially those core values of shifting power dynamics. Yeah, so that's great. So that sounds like a good example of how it might be represented. I think Melissa, if that's how you pronounce, said marginalization or discrimination. Yeah, so really focusing on these kind of like negative experiences. Yeah, deficit focused. I see Laurie mentioned that. And yeah, that's exactly what I was. You can go ahead and advance the slide. A lot of times I do see it's focused on the negative. They're not always the great examples that I think Johanna, was it Johanna? Yeah, shared. A lot of times it might be comparing like a structurally marginalized group to say a white standard and really focusing on, oh, this is like where they're falling short. And sometimes, especially in policy, that can be important to get certain people to care and to like, divert funds towards that issue. But if you only talk about deficit, then you're falling into this trap of a single story, which maybe I should throw in the link later, but there's a really great TED Talk by one of my favorite authors ever, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who talks about the danger of a single story and how when we really focus on these singular stories of deficit, we may have, say, a positive reason for doing it. Like we want to, you know, get funds towards solving a certain problem, but you start telling the story and people don't recognize the areas of strength. People may be hearing these stories about their own communities and always seeing that they're falling short. And that can have really negative repercussions for those community members. So next slide. Oh, let's skip this one. I decided I would take too long. Thanks. So there's some avenues and research methods that we can take to really focus on centering the strengths of participants in their communities. Again, I'm going to ask for you go back. Thanks. Okay, you got a little hint towards one of the possible answers, but there's a lot of avenues you can take. So I'd like to hear from, again, at least two of you all, some ideas that you have for ways, maybe specific parts of the process when you can center the strengths of participants and really include them. Just a few examples.
We do a lot of work with young people that are involved with child welfare system, juvenile justice system, everything. And one of the sort of classic features of evaluation in those spaces is psychometric scales. And they are notoriously horrendously deficit based.
Mhm.
And we built the psychometric scales based on a framework that was strengths based and reframed strengths that were not present as what they needed for traditional measures to be able to justify the funding. But the way it was presented to the youth was entirely different. And we got really different response rates than you're used to with classic
Mm.
psychometric tests.
Yeah, and there's actually a really great paper by Dr. Jackie Matisse, who I think looked at positive Black parenting and created a whole scale that came from like within the community itself and really just focusing on totally different things, felt more like valid, told a more complete story. So yeah, I definitely think that's an area that could use some work. Um, let's see. So then we have a few other things here. Yeah, including with data collection, interviews, and talking circles. Yeah, I think these are all like great ideas. Health research perspective. Yeah, partners. Exactly. That's going to be something that we talk about as well. Question development, co-design of measures, intervention, and dissemination. That's fantastic. So you all, I think we can now show what my bullet points were for this one. Yeah, I feel like you all together were able to anticipate a lot of the things I was going to bring up. Really thinking about how you can include from beginning to end, thinking about what kinds of questions are you asking. I think if you only focus on vulnerability or only resiliency, that each of those can be an issue in their own way. I think really balancing the two and telling this complete holistic story is really important. Data collection that allows participants to push back. So, say, even with a survey, maybe you allow some open response spaces for them to write, this didn't make any sense to me. They can fight back on some of the methods that you're using, even with more traditional methods. Also, analysis methods that allow participants to give input, I think, are really powerful. So, I'm going to talk about that a little more with Photovoice. And then translation of research to benefit communities, specifically in ways that they see fit. And I know we're 11 minutes in and I still haven't even told you what Photovoice is. We're almost there, I promise. But first, I just want to highlight what is participatory action research so that because this is, Photovoice falls within this larger category. In participatory action research, you're really looking at including participants as co-investigators, collaborators. It's not like doing unto, you're really doing with. And together, you're creating new knowledge. There's the research component. And then you're using this experience and that new knowledge to really make positive change. And so I think another thing to think about too is community trust. I think this process can build trust. But at the same time, I know there's some researchers. I actually mentioned Dr. Jackie Matisse earlier. I know she talked about spending a year with a community before ever collecting any data. And that was to really build that trust in advance before you even begin data collection. And you're going to get much higher quality data that way. So we can advance to the next slide. Okay, finally, we're getting to what Photovoice is. So this allows people to identify, represent, enhance their community through specific photographic technique. Their users are visual anthropologists. They've been described as research collaborators. So you can see very much aligned with participatory action research values. So a general snapshot of the technique. So community members, they'll come in maybe the first session and they're going to learn basics of photographic techniques. They don't need to become artists. I just think it's important in that first session to make sure that they can have the skills necessary in photography to be able to convey what they want to convey and not have their photography skills or lack thereof to get in the way of that. Participants will maybe select the theme. Sometimes they're part of the topic selection. Other times you might be limited by your grant, and so you have to come in with a topic. So that can be either way. But anyways, in that first session, you probably have a sense of what your theme might be. Some of these Photovoice projects are longer or shorter, but generally by the first session, they're going to, or at least very early on, know what that theme will be. Then they go out in the world, they take photographs, they're thinking about captions, they're thinking about what do they want to share verbally with the group. So they have advanced time to think about what they want to say, which I think is quite important for some of the groups I've worked with, like adolescent refugees who may be bilingual, but also not entirely comfortable in either language yet. They're in this in-between period. So having that advanced notice helps them verbalize what they want to say versus if they're put on the spot, say an interview. Then they come together in the small groups and they have a conversation, and the photos are really what are the impetus of that conversation because they share the photos first, and then that's going to be what drives the conversation. That's like the beginning point. And I always train facilitators to take as much of a backseat as possible. But when they do jump in and when they do direct the conversation, I always tell them to focus on something a participant has already said, maybe something a photo elicited, a comment a photo elicited, and then they ask to hear more about that. So it's very different than, say, a focus group where the researcher comes in with a set of questions and starts asking those. This is really driven by the participants' experience in those photos. And then for it to be Photovoice, the group has to create an action plan. They have to make some sort of plan and take action to positively change the community. And that's often a result of some kind of thoughts that they had from their group discussion. Sometimes I think you see people trying to do Photovoice without that, but it's not Photovoice without it. And then not always in these projects do group members become part of the analysis process, but I think that makes it much more powerful. I've even had 12-year-olds learn how to do thematic coding, Brown and Clark kind of style, if you're familiar with that. And I think they did it quite well. And it's fun for them too when they're really academically motivated, the participants I've had, to know I'm doing something that college students are doing, that professors are doing. And I think it's very motivating and empowering to them to know that. And it's also, I think, very helpful when you're doing your own analysis. You can then compare the analysis that these participants did and say, is this crossing over? Where am I seeing something different? Why might that be? Where are we seeing overlap? I think that adds a lot of power. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through these quickly, Alex. I know we need to save some time. So these are just some examples from my very, very first Photovoice project that I ever did. But you can see the photos and the captions are quite interesting. So you can advance to the next, look for a second, advance to the next, give you a second to look. No, let's hang on this one for a second. Oops, the next one with the flag. Yeah. So I'll just explain this one because I think it really shows some of the power of photo voice. The person who took this had come from Brazil to the US when he was a kid, and he always had this feeling of conflict. And that in the US, his Brazilian heritage really wasn't valued, and that he was constantly being pressured to assimilate. And this photo, I think if someone looked at that without the caption, they would look at this and they would recognize it's a very recognizable part of campus. It's a part people go through every day. People might look at this and think of, oh, like positive memories from hanging out with my friends, walking through here, going to class. People might look at the flag and some people might feel a sense of pride or nationalism. But for him, he sees this tall flagpole, big American flag there, and it just reminds him that there's this pressure to constantly assimilate, and it's just looming over him. So I think this kind of shows that photo voice allows you to see the world, maybe the same world that you inhabit. Maybe you inhabit the same space, but people are interpreting it in potentially a very different way. And I think that is even more powerful than just hearing someone say, I feel pressure to assimilate, but really looking at the lived environment that you might share and seeing how different people might interpret that in different ways. So you really get a window through someone's own worldview. And we can go quickly through the rest of them just to give an idea of what sort of photos you might get. And you can see some are more symbolic, like this one, whereas the next one is much more practical. These are the places I go every day, these grocery stores. Yeah, you can move to the next one. And the next. I want you to just have these as thought questions, and you can save it maybe in the questions potentially. I want to make sure we get to Joy's part of the talk, but I just want you to start thinking, what benefits might you anticipate from the method, and what challenges and concerns do you have that might come with this method? I want you to just start thinking about that as Joy starts to present, and then you can be ready to ask questions at the end.
Great. Thanks so much, Andrea. I'm going to stop monitoring the chat because I can only see so many things on my little screen here at the same time. So please unmute yourself, or Andrea or one of the facilitators, if you see something in the chat, please go ahead and stop me. So this is part 2, and I'll build on what Andrea was talking about, and then also share some of my experiences using Photo Voice in mental health clubhouses in Hawaii, and share some results that we had both from the actual project, and then also we went back and did a retrospective analysis looking at some of the discussion that happened during the method. A bit about me. I'm from the Oregon coast. I try to live near the ocean if I can. It's very important to me. This is a picture of me and my niece and nephew. I was having him just pick up logs because I think he just had too much energy. It's a little bit out of control. I'm an occupational therapist, and if anyone doesn't know what that is, OTs can do a lot of different things, but the short and response is that we help people participate in activities that are meaningful to them, and often they're folks with some sort of illness or disability or having some type of challenge, and then we do an intervention either in the person, like physical therapy might, or in the activity, such as with assistive technology, or in the environment. And I'm a community psychologist as well, so I tend to focus a lot on environment. How do environments impede or facilitate engagement in different types of activities that are meaningful to people or that are essential to their health and well-being? One of the environments and settings that I work with in community mental health are called mental health clubhouses. And they're awesome. They were started in collaboration between people with mental health conditions and psychiatrists in New York City in the 40s. And it was started by a group of patients that were in a psychiatric ward together. And they found that their social connection, the support they provided each other, was essential to their recovery. And they continued to meet after they were discharged. And they ended up forming the first clubhouse. And now, and the model, how Clubhouse works, it really promotes recovery through community, and community is developed through engagement together, which I'll talk more about. So there are clubhouses around the world. There might be one near you, maybe there's not, and you want to start one. And there's a lot of, if you want to check if there are any near you, Clubhouse International has a map where you can look closely, and also they have lots of resources and supports in case anyone is passionate about community mental health and feels like they need something like that in their community. So, past research on the Clubhouse model, it's been shown to decrease hospitalizations and length of stay in the hospital, reduce outpatient treatment, reduce stress on families, improve employment outcomes, and improve quality of life. But there has been little research that emphasized process. So, how do these things come about? What's going on within the clubhouse that might be leading to some of these results? It's generally researcher driven. The research that's been done, the questions were generated typically by researchers and often occurred in the mainland United States, some in Western Europe, but primarily white populations as well. And I began working with my clubhouses during my doctoral degree at University of Hawaii at Manoa, starting with a program evaluation, and then it's just our collaboration just continued to build. So we follow a CBPR approach, which Andrea mentioned, and I just want to say, because when I was getting started in this, and questions that I find a lot is, okay, I get it. I understand the concept of this, but how are you supposed to do it? Because we're very trained in the mechanics of how to do conventional research, but often not participatory research. And part of it is just, in my view, spending time together, doing things together, showing up. This is a picture from a Thanksgiving celebration that we had at one of the clubhouses. And of course, it's easier when there's a geographic location you can go to, but that trust building and yeah, doing things together, having meals together, etc., that's not directed by a particular purpose all the time. This is a map of clubhouses in Hawaii. There are 9 across 4 islands. And there are some photos sprinkled throughout here from this multi-year Photovoice project we did. And I'll get more into the results. But we involved 5 clubhouses on Oahu and Kauai. And just to back up, since we're talking about method, when I was starting, I was thinking the Clubhouse Coalition, there's a Hawaii Clubhouse Coalition. I really wanted them to be involved in deciding what method we would use to begin with. But I didn't know how to do that because they're not necessarily familiar with different methods. So we had a meeting and I just I gave a brief presentation description. Here's different kinds of methods we could use. Here are different types of questions we could ask with those. And then had people vote. We discussed, and then the Clubhouse Coalition members voted. And they surprised me. I thought they were going to want to do something more conventional because there was a lot of discussion of like, we need to show this works. But after hearing all the options, they really wanted to do something more exploratory. So I think something that I love about doing community engaged research is that I'm consistently surprised. I'm like, okay, that didn't go how I thought it would. Awesome. That's why we do this engagement process, right? Because if you're just doing everything that you already anticipated, then it's how much there's still like value in it. But it's exciting to me, I guess I could say, when I'm surprised. So we had this big picture goal of thinking about how are clubhouses contributing to change? What's happening within clubhouses? Or what are some of the issues too that are preventing change in ways that people would like to see? And so I really wanted clubhouse members because the coalition has some members, but it's mostly staff and directors. I really wanted members to give input. And we held these brainstorming sessions at each clubhouse when we started and just talked about, just throw ideas out there. What are things that you think are important to focus on? And we did a quick joining thematic coding of types of things people were focused on, and then voted and consolidated. And so we came to these prompts together. And what's the first thing that you notice? You could put in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself about. These were the 5 across the 5 clubhouses that came up. What's something that you notice about them? Yeah, they're all positive. Thank you, Melissa. And I have to say, what would a researcher like when we came in? But yeah, that's true too. Yeah, holistic circular worldview. There's an emphasis outside the person, the just individual as well. So we came in thinking of like, how are problems solved in this setting? But there was a very different orientation of, hey, we want to talk about what makes people feel happy, how we derive meaning and purpose from the work that we're doing here. So again, we were like, okay, this is good because we're coming up with something different. We weren't sure how we were going to analyze it at first, because then we were, are these things going to line up? We need to analyze them separately. But we came to find after we held all of the sessions that there really were themes that were cross-cutting, and we could think about it together, even though those prompts and questions were different. And I'd like to say too, even when you have a specific question, the way that we broke down the sessions, we invite Clubhouse members to come up with more focused sub-questions or topics that they think that they want to focus on and think are interesting. There's ways to further engagement, even if you do have to start out with a predetermined question because of, say, your grant funding or your role or whatever. The first phase of the data analysis also I want to mention is as a group while you're looking at the photos. So that is a meaning making time. That's an analysis time that's happening collectively. And you're taking something concrete, and then you're considering it also in abstract way, just what is the meaning behind this, and then other people sharing their perspective. So I really think of that as like that's the first analysis phase. So after we had gone through and done additional coding, we developed a conceptual model that we took back to the clubhouses and then said, does this seem right? Does this match does this kind of match your experience? And talked through this in sort of a story format, which basically started with how quality of participation at the clubhouse, not just coming, but the role that people embodied there, how it contributed to their sense of self, but also the development of reciprocal relationships. This need of being needed came up again and again, and is something that, again, to the point of discovering things and being surprised, it's like most mental health settings are very directive. It's like services are provided. And here, what people talked about that was most important to them was that reciprocity, feeling needed, giving and taking. And that led to a sense of mattering, which reduced stigma and created a destigmatized environment, but also just changed how people thought about themselves and increased their own belief about what was possible, going back to work, taking on new challenges, etc. And overall, that contributing to quality of life. To the point of like, how do you link this with maybe with survey methods that have more of a positivist history? We use that conceptual model that was generated through this to find measures that were congruent with these different constructs, and then brought them back again, said, does this make sense? We had different options. Are some of these, should they be removed? Should we use something else, etc.? And engage members also in thoughts about dissemination. What can we do with this information? Where can we share it? How can we share it in ways that are beyond the academic publications, which I have to say, members and staff were really excited about those too. Being published, seeing things in print was really exciting, but also finding how can these photos and stories and quotes be linked with other things to be disseminated to the broader community. during these feedback sessions we had, one of the thing that came up again and again was like members talking about uh, feeling like one of the outcomes of the research, because we said, do you think this is worthwhile? What should we change? What can we learn from this? And so many people talked about, oh, I felt so much closer to other members, or I felt closer to staff, or I felt closer to the researchers after we did this. And so we thought, what if we go back and look at the transcripts, not for our original purpose, but we code them for different types of social support and exchange that happened during the sessions. So we use this classic framework for thinking of social support in different ways: emotional, informational support, instrumental, and appraisal, which some of you might be familiar with. So emotional support was mostly happened through empathic encouragement, empathic responses to adversity in particular. So here, one of the members was talking about having a moment of despair, not knowing where he was going to go, what he was going to do. And when he came to Clubhouse and talking about his ability to go back to work at some point, and another member just says, I'm proud of you, brother. And there's things like this happened all the time where someone would just spontaneously say, I'm proud of you, or say, that was really hard and I've been through that too. So here, a member was talking about being forced to go to substance use classes during the day, even though she didn't have a substance use problem, because they just wanted to send her somewhere and there was nothing for her to do. And another member, and this was not the topic of the session. None of these things were the topic of the sessions. These were just things that spontaneously happened as people were sharing their photos, their experiences, etc. And another member talked about her experience. I understand what that was like. I was super isolated before coming here. I didn't have anything to do during the day as well. There was a lot of connection through humor. I don't have a good quote to illustrate this because it's hard to capture. Most of our coding, it would be like in little bits and quips and responses. And we always, when we're transcribing, also code laughter or long periods of silence or other things that are emotional, nonverbal expressions that contextualize what's said. But I feel like this photo just shows it's just a fun group. Yeah, there was a lot of humor and laughter and support, emotional support that came through that. In terms of informational support, there was spontaneous advice on things like symptom management, promoting wellness, employment. This photo is a member took to describe. This was actually in the meaning and purpose session. He was talking about some of the things that he would do in this room and looking out towards Diamond Head, how that made him think about where he was going in life. But that was also where he would go if he was feeling paranoid. And he said, I just need to move. I've learned I just need to move. I need to shift settings. And then this whole conversation ensued where people were talking about different things that help them. Joseph talked about breaking out of this flight or fight feeling by reflecting on things he had accomplished. So there was a lot of natural informational support sharing that occurred during the session. Instrumental is a tough one for this because instrumental support is really, I give someone a ride if they need a ride, or if I bring someone groceries, that they're tangible services. But during the process, there was a lot of members helping other members, helping staff, researchers helping members. Staff were involved as well. Some members also maybe helped staff with the actual photography process. Probably the most clear example of this was we had a member who was blind, and I asked her if she wanted to participate. And she said, yes, absolutely, and gave us very clear instructions. This is her on the right. She set up, staged this whole situation of her. She said, I want you to take a photo of me counting money, and then talked about her. This was in the Healing Power of Work, and she talked about her role in the clerical unit. She's brilliant. This is also her photo on the left. She wanted us to take a photo of the kitchen and what was happening there, and had a very clear vision for that. So for many reasons, people helped each other with the actual photography process and connected through that. Appraisal was the most common. So appraisal is it's information that's useful to understand our own selves, useful for self-evaluation. And you can imagine this is participants, many of them face multiple intersecting forms of discrimination regularly and have a lot of information coming that is the opposite of positive appraisal. It's messaging about it's stigmatized messaging. And so this was really profound. This also just happens in the clubhouse generally, but it both positive self-appraisal, reflecting on their own process, being proud of going through and sticking with the commitment of, because we had multiple sessions and we made the commitment clear, but also positive appraisal towards each other for both the actual photos, what the photos represented, and what they said about people. So this was in the past, present, future, telling the stories of our lives group. And someone shared a photo that he took of one of his paintings. And there was a lot of discussion about him being gifted, thinking that he should sell art, and also what the photos meant about the person. So this is a photo that a member took of her orchids at home. And here one of the other participants is saying how healthy it is. So they both comment on the picture, but also say the way that you take care of the pots, the medium, etc. It shows how much you love and care, how much love and care you provide for the orchids and the flowers they produce. So there was a lot of positive feedback that was reflecting on what the photo said about the person in the world, and who they were, what they contributed. Yeah, that's everything I have to share there. And I want to leave some time for questions. These are some photos of different folks in our group, and happy to share. Also, the article is open access where we dive into this a little bit more. So I'll leave it at that, and maybe we could have a little time just for questions and discussion and reflections.
Thank you so much. Yeah, feel free to just unmute, go into chats, and if we'll wait a bit to see if anyone else has questions. Otherwise, I've got plenty of thoughts and experiences that I'd love to talk through.
So we have a question in the chat from Melissa. What would you recommend for someone considering Photovoice for the first time? Andrea, do you want to start, and then I can maybe chime in if there's any?
Yeah. I think one of like the most helpful things was I think when you're training the facilitators or training yourself would be to do a practice round with people who are not in the study. Like just your study team or your friend, like whoever you can wrangle up, just so that you can feel more confident. Because I think one thing with this community-based research, it can go in any direction and you have to really be prepared for all kinds of things. I don't know about you, Joy. I feel like we get a lot of intense emotions as well. Like when people have like, tears, there's been a lot. So you just really have to be prepared for a lot of things. And I think by at least getting the technical pieces hammered out where you've just done it before and you feel more confident about that, then that gives you, I don't know, emotional room and brain space to then be ready for these unexpected things. I think another thing too is allowing the participants to practice. I didn't do that the first time. The first time I did with adolescents, I felt like that was like the most important group to do it with, but I think they were still just a little unclear, even though we went over everything. And I think once they then shared the photos, they wished that they're like, oh, or now that I did it, I feel like maybe I would have taken different pictures. So I think in that first session, you can do a little practice round where you have almost like a fake topic or something, and they can start taking pictures of things and I think just letting the participants practice, letting yourself practice. I think that's really, really helpful. Joy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. We did a practice session with our group, and it's also good to real feel for yourself. What is it like to share your photos? And also, yeah, the logistics. We developed a topic together. And I have to say, our group got a lot closer as well during that process. So, because we were sharing things that in ways that we didn't know each other as well. So that was a neat, unexpected outcome of that. But yeah, there was a lot of processes that we developed after our run through. There are a lot of manuals out there too that are very user friendly, many of them designed for community groups. And they're worth looking through because they also present different types of options. Like, how do you want to just have one photo displayed and then everyone's talking about it? Some people use sorting techniques. Do you want people to be able to bring or contribute multiple photos? Do you want to print them out in their hard copy? So there's different ways of just the logistics of the process. Yeah, we had a rule. We just did one photo per session, per person per session. Also, we did a Photovoice online and through Zoom, and we limited groups. We used breakout rooms, but that can be definitely challenging to manage all of those logistical pieces. So I agree, yeah, with the practice. And one other thing about that, when people are sharing, so there's people commonly use a showed form. So it's, I don't remember each of the acronyms. What do you see? I don't know, it's too early. I can't remember what each of the letters are, but you can look it up. But what we found was, so we gave the people the option, we gave the participants the option of using it. What we found was when people used it, sometimes the conversation flowed less freely, and it would be like reading it, and then it was almost like we stopped and then would go back to, okay, so a more natural conversation, but it's not always, sometimes it helped and sometimes it hindered conversation. So yeah, that's something to experiment with as well.
I'll also just add in terms of local resources, there are quite a few of us within social sciences at McMaster that have done Photovoice and are really happy to help people kind of work through the process and coach through it. So I think being able to apprentice or at least have support from others that have already done it can be really helpful.
Mhm. And also, I would recommend when you're preparing your materials, we decided to give participants the option to either use their real name or pseudonym. And you might consider that because the go-to is for everyone to have to be blinded and so on, or to be their names to be removed. But sometimes people really felt, actually, the majority of our participants felt like this is my content, this is my knowledge. I want it to be attributed. And we've had some trouble with reviewers, even for naming the clubhouse, and I'll go back and then talk with them again and say, okay, do you guys want to be, here's the how this turned out. Are you sure you still want to be named? And consistently the answer has been yes. So yeah, I think just some of the things are a little bit difficult to navigate with systems that are set up for more conventional research, but it sounds like you have some resources on campus too, folks that are willing to help you think about that. Any
Um,
other questions, reflections? Oh, sorry.
well, I was just going to highlight too, having at least two facilitators so that if something comes up, one person can deal with that issue and then there's still someone else to keep running the project. These are the things that I think don't get mentioned in papers. Like, yeah.
I just wanted to flag Lori's comments and especially the second one about being a participant and feeling really differently about the photos taken. I always describe the first session as almost the first pancake, that it is that sort of experimentation and trial, and that everybody gets better at what they want, at capturing what they want through a photograph, that's not a natural process for everyone.
Mhm.
And I think you can build that in too. So I often end up not doing the discussion of photos, the small group discussions in just one session. I've started doing it across more sessions. And part of that, people sometimes just forget their pictures or just to have more time to discuss. But then also, if someone's, oh, I wish I had taken a picture of something out, then they can bring it to the next session. So I think that's another way you can build that in along with practice. We have a question, I see. Oh, yeah, I never did virtual, but Joy, it sounds like you did.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it was so among our participants, it was a challenge because many of them were less familiar with Zoom or with using phones or computers to take or share photos. It depends on the group that you're working with, I would say can be would be very straightforward. I think with many people who lived on Zoom for quite a bit of time, but we had to do a lot of teaching folks, okay, here's how to, if not share screen, it could be taking a picture and sending it to one of us if they knew how to text. So we had a lot of negotiation in the group and prep, people ready to help to talk folks through how to share their photos, etc. And then there's the regular Zoom challenge of people speak less naturally. There's less kind of spontaneous conversation around things. And so we had to have more built-in time, opportunity for prompting responses. And yeah, I think those were some of the challenges. And we tended to have smaller groups too. So we did breakouts. So it was a little bit easier to try to really get everybody talking that was there without managing the normal Zoom challenges.
You just dropped in a couple links to some papers, and I saw Joy also put in a link to her paper.
Having the spontaneous conversation over Zoom, you mean, in particular? Yeah, it's difficult, and I think requesting, asking for responses, and just having if people are able, using the chat and other things that we typically do to try to get conversation going. It depends so much on your group too. Within ours, there was so much like desire to support other members, and we also included members and staff. So it might be one of the questions we got from the reviewer, the social support paper was like, what if this is just these groups in this setting in this population? Although we did experience that within and among ourselves too, but there might be situations where people have a lot less trust for the other folks in the room coming into it too. So I think that will depend a lot on who you have and what the pre-existing situation might be. There might have to be more community building there.
I'll just add to that quickly. I think sometimes you have to go through the awkward, and as the facilitator, not jump in right away to really get people to a place where they've decided that they're going to come on screen, that they're going to start talking. That depending on what else is going on in their lives, that can be a fairly big hurdle for people online. To just allow the awkwardness and give it a little bit of space, I think does a lot to um, help people calm down and begin to really start sharing.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. I can stick around for a little bit. Andrea, it was great learning more about your work too, and thank you for co-presenting too.
Thank you both so much for joining us, and thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.